All right, welcome everyone. My name is Carson McPherson-Krutzke, and I am a research associate at the Natural Hazards Center at the University of Colorado Boulder. I am very happy to welcome you to today's Making Mitigation Work webinar series. This is hosted by the Natural Hazards Center and made possible through funding support from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as well as the National Science Foundation. This series was launched in 2019, and it highlights recent progress in mitigation, policy, practice, and research. I do want to let you all know today's webinar is being recorded. The caption, video recording, and the presentation slides from today's webinar will be posted online at the Natural Hazards Center website at hazards.colorado.edu. This is also where you can find recordings and supplemental materials from prior Making Mitigation Work webinars, as well as get access to other free resources. So please do go check that out after our meeting today. In a few moments, I'm going to turn over the controls to our speakers, but we do really encourage you to ask questions throughout, or even at the end. We'll hold a bit of time, about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for audience questions. You can either add your questions to the chat, or you can go ahead and use the Q&A box as well throughout. Thanks to partnerships that we have with the International Association of Emergency Managers, or IAEM, and the Association of State Floodplain Managers, attending this webinar makes you eligible to receive 1 contact hour of emergency management training through IAEM or ASFPM. So if you do want to get credit, you have to attend the entire session today. And if you do fulfill that requirement, then please go ahead and email us at hazcenter@colorado.edu to request your certificate. And please let us know which type of certificate you would like. You can also visit the Making Mitigation Work webpage under the Trainings tab at hazards.colorado.edu for more information about continuing education credits. Now, I'm very excited to introduce today's webinar, which is titled Living by the Levee, Navigating Flood Resilience with Unsheltered Communities. Today, we're going to be hearing from 2 speakers with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who are going to be discussing a recent project focused on understanding the perspectives of dam and levee managers, as well as unhoused populations living along waterways. Our panelists will be discussing some outcomes from a series of interagency and interdisciplinary workshops and share some of the lessons learned that can be applied elsewhere. So please join me in welcoming our 2 speakers today. First, we have Jessica Ludi, who's a Silver Jackets coordinator and flood risk program manager for the San Francisco district of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. She has spent more than 15 years in integrated flood management in private and public sectors. She co-chairs the Flood Risk Communication Committee and Social Justice Task Force at the Association of State Floodplain Managers. Her master's research at the University of California, Berkeley is on flood risk perception and levees, and inspired her to work in flood risk management and eventually to make her way to the federal government. Levee acknowledges and respects the wisdom and the vibrant cultures of thousands of environmental justice leaders whose work she has built on today. We also have Emily Marcel, who is the lead planner for the Detroit district of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Great Lakes Coastal Resilience Study, a large-scale project assessing resource changes in the Great Lakes Basin under different climate scenarios. She also serves as the secondary Silver Jackets coordinator for the Detroit district. Previously, Emily interned with the San Francisco District Silver Jackets, where she supported the project that they're talking about today at improving flood resiliency for unsheltered communities living near flood zones. She earned her master's degree in environmental policy and planning from the University of Michigan in 2023. So now I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to our speakers. And you're muted right now, Jessica.
Okay, great. You can hear me now?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, and thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are calling in from. I would like to ask you what kind of panda bear you feel like today. and you can just throw it in the chat or just think about it. You don't have to reply. I will say, and it will probably be evident by the end of today's talk, that this little one here, number 6, is usually how I find myself. But I find myself in the company often of all of these folks. And I work at the Corps of Engineers, which means a lot of engineers. And so a lot of them are like this, but I love working with them. So yeah, feel free to put them in there. Great to see it. Okay. I'm gonna change, and this is basically the same slide that Carson just presented. So I just want to reintroduce. I'm Jessica Ludi. I work in the San Francisco District Corps of Engineers. I've been at the government for about 5 years, and I am the mother to a 5.5-year-old named Lucia, who loves being with nature. And the other day we were watching Frozen 2. And at the beginning of Frozen 2, there's a story about how the kingdom built a dam for the indigenous community there. And Lucia said, "But Mama, that's not strengthening the waters, that's hurting the waters." And so anyway, with that, I'm happy to be at the Army Corps of Engineers and want to introduce my colleague and co-conspirator, Emily Marcel.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, like Carson and Jessica said, my name is Emily Marcel. I'm the lead planner for the Coastal Resiliency Study in the Great Lakes. It's a mega study with the Chicago District, Buffalo District, and Detroit. So I'm the lead planner for our district. And I worked with Jessica 2 years ago on this study. And yeah, happy to be here to talk about it with you guys all today.
Thanks, Emily. All right, so that's why we are here today. Here, I'm hiding myself. I don't need to look at my own pictures. Okay. So today's talk came about because in the last few years at the Corps of Engineers, we've been hearing from a lot of our local partners who operate dams and levees and other flood control facilities about some of their challenges in safely operating and maintaining that infrastructure, particularly with the growing number of unsheltered people living in these various very dangerous spaces. Our local partners are also extremely concerned with the well-being of some of our most vulnerable, most exposed, most marginalized community members in the face of ever-growing flood risk and housing crisis. In addition to immediate flood safety concerns, there is also a systemic issue here because many unhoused people are not part of the planning decisions that affect them, and they're not able to access federal flood resilience or disaster program benefits. As just one example, post-disaster financial assistance is often tied to owning property and the economic losses that that property experiences. But if you don't own a house that was damaged, you're not going to be eligible for the financial recovery assistance money under that program. And you know, we also know that these challenges today go beyond any one agency or organization or law, any one organization's ability, expertise, or resources, and we need a whole community solution. And so our Silver Jackets program, which I'll explain in a little bit, in partnership with the state of California, it gave us the resources to collaborate with multiple agencies and organizations and community members to begin solving complex flood risk management challenges. So today, I'll first provide a brief background on who the Army Corps of Engineers is and what we do, and the Silver Jackets program. We'll provide an overview of the project that formed the basis of this work, some of the key findings, our recommended actions for change, and then we'll have time for some discussion. So first, who are we and what do we do? U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I have San Francisco district here because this is left over from a different slide deck, but it's the entire Corps of Engineers does this work. I just happen to work in the San Francisco district. So what are our mission areas? So Congress determines what the Corps of Engineers works on and gives us money to work on it. So we are a federal agency within the Department of Defense. We got our start in 1775. At the Corps of Engineers, we implement water resources projects. So these projects can focus on ecosystem restoration, specifically aquatic ecosystem restoration that looks like a lot of floodplain and wetland restoration. We can work on navigation projects, which often looks like dredging or widening channels for commercial navigation. And we work on flood risk management. We also often are recommended or requested to work on multi-purpose projects. We also have an authority from Congress that we permit projects along waterways. This is under the Clean Water Act. We also operate and maintain water infrastructure that we built. So there are some federal shipping channels, there are some federal dams, some federal levees. And then we also support state emergency management and response activities. And broadly, we are funded by projects. So Congress authorizes a project and then appropriate funds to a project, and that is where we get our funding to work on it. This can be different than some agencies where they might have a budget to allow them to accomplish a mission, but ours operates kind of like a consulting company in that we have project numbers and project funding and that sort of thing. Now, our National Silver Jackets Interagency Program. The project we're going to talk about today was completed under this. So Silver Jackets is a state-led collaboration in partnership with federal, local, and community organizations. Each state has a team. So no matter where you live, your state has a team. And those teams are led by the state and very strongly supported by the Corps of Engineers, and then in partnership with a bunch of other organizations. In California, our team is led by the California Department of Water Resources. We work together on all of those teams, first to identify priorities at the state level, all related to flood risk. So you can see I have the flood risk management cycle in there. And then we provide technical assistance to communities to reduce that risk. And one of the benefits of the Silver Jackets program is that it allows us more so than some of our other programs to take like a whole of government and whole of community approach by bringing many partners to the table, which helps build relationships. It increases communities' access to resources and decision makers. And it also helps the Corps be able to implement, for example, the Justice 40 initiative, and it brings the whole of government to the table to solve one problem together. I can explain more information about it later on, and including how you can get involved. If you don't know, if you're interested in this and you don't know who your state agency lead is, you can contact myself or Emily, and we can help connect you with them. So first, why are we involved in this discussion related to people experiencing homelessness? So at the Corps of Engineers and others in the flood risk management world, we build and manage flood-related infrastructure. Therefore, our work directly affects and is affected by all communities living in and near water resources infrastructure. Second, our local partners are concerned about levee performance, dam performance, and safety in the community that they are responsible for protecting. And along with many of our interagency partners in California, but also nationally, quite simply, we are concerned. That photo on the right shows just two of the more than 1,500 people living in stormwater tunnels underneath Las Vegas. And this issue is growing nationally. I just read a report yesterday that is expected that in the United States there will be 650,000 individuals experiencing homelessness. Especially in the last couple of years in our California district offices, the Corps of Engineers views the intersection of people experiencing homelessness with natural hazards, as well as our response to them, as environmental issues where, the just treatment, human rights, access to resources, participation in decision making. And so we're trying to approach these issues with those principles in mind. And so finally, we're having this discussion today because the current administrative priorities for environmental justice call for centering experiences of marginalized communities in our work. And under Executive Order 14008 and Executive Order 14096, we're reinforcing our commitment to address these issues across the federal family. So now Emily will talk a bit about the project.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Could you go to the next slide? Perfect. So the problem as it came to us, so from the Army Corps' perspective, we're really interested in the risks that all our projects have, including our infrastructure risks. So I want to highlight the infrastructure part before we get into all the other ways that different risks, interconnect. So like Jessica said, we own, operate, and maintain infrastructure such as levees and dams. And so we're required to map out these risks. One of the risks being increased chance of a levee break and the damage to infrastructure. A lot of our partners have talked about how some people have dug quite literally into levees, which damages the structural integrity of the levee, which can harm not only the community itself, but the people who are being protected by the levee. On top of all of this, we have the loss of federal support after a flood. So that got us thinking, if you can talk, or if you could go to the next slide, about our project, the Unsheltered Flood Resilience Project. And some of the goals that we thought of was to not only improve and help our infrastructure, but also improve the life safety and public health and long-term well-being for unsheltered individuals and households during the whole flood risk management cycle. So before, during, and after floods. Our secondary goal was to help flood and water agencies build the capacity and resources they need to manage flood risks at this interface. And so how we decided to approach this was by doing 2 workshops. And these workshops, our goals were to center the needs of flood-prone, unsheltered communities across the flood risk management cycle. And since this is a Silver Jackets project, the main goal of the Silver Jackets program is to increase collaboration and knowledge exchange between disciplines and different agencies that overlap in this space. And during the workshops, we wanted to identify barriers, some challenges, some gaps that we can tackle together as a team, and develop a set of care-centered flood risk management recommendations, which we'll talk about in just a second. If you go to the next slide, perfect. The first workshop was a virtual one, and that had 40 plus attendees representing Parks and Rec, Public Works, resource managers, social services, and those representing unsheltered people. So basically, what we did was we mapped sort of ongoing actions that are currently taken by these various organizations across Southern California before, during, and after flood events. And then we identified the needs and future actions for a care-driven flood risk management response. And then our second workshop happened a couple months after and sort of built on the knowledge that we learned from the first workshop. Again, still had a really great turnout with all these different participants in flood risk management, health and social services, environmental interests, grassroots organizations. And we structured it in sort of a panel discussion. So we had 3 panels that talked about their separate challenges and perspectives. And then we had a 30-minute breakout session at the end where we all came together to discuss different ways that we can basically improve and protect unsheltered individuals and families living in and near waterways. So the first panel was just focused on the experience of unhoused people living in and near floodways. The second panel was just focused on the challenges of managing flood risk infrastructure and the facilities with the presence of unhoused people. And then the last panel was a discussion on the approaches to a care-driven flood risk management. We had 71 participants, and we had 50+ Bay Area organizations show up. And thinking about this now and just reflecting on it, this one was very, very informative for me, and I think a lot of other people. Not to say that the first one wasn't, but thinking about it now, I feel like this workshop would have done better if it went first, because it was very informative and very specific to each perspective. And I think if I were to do something, or we were to do something like this again, flipping those the format of the workshop would probably be beneficial and interesting to see what we got out of that. But like I said, both workshops are really great, very informative. And yeah, we'll talk about what came out of that in just a second.
Great. Thanks, Emily. I second your sentiment on those workshops. I think in particular, like in the first one, we really started off going, okay, what is each partner or agency doing before, during, and after a flood? And we realized that a key perspective missing from that discussion was knowing anything about the experiences of people who experience homelessness. And so hearing what Emily said, we spent a lot of time, and I'll share in a moment, in the second workshop and doing our own research, better getting a handle on some of these basic issues that need to be at the table before we can even start trying to, quote, solve a problem. So I'll share some of the key takeaways from our regional workshops and some of the prep work that went into them. So I would say one of the first and maybe most powerful, I messed up the animation here, so ignore the words re-traumatization until I actually get there. But one of the best outcomes, I think, of this project for a lot of us being Army Corps staff, us being flood resilience practitioners, was a better understanding of, quote, the problem, right? Emily showed you the problem and what it looked like when it first came to us, which was really focused on, like, is the levee going to perform? Could the levee fail? Our agency is going to be eligible for disaster assistance if the levee doesn't meet Army Corps standards. It was very much focused on the levee. And following these workshops and discussions, we got a much better handle on the understanding of the problem, both in terms of its complexity, but also how we can think about it in a less overwhelming or scary way, if that makes sense. So we have this growing flood risk, and we started with the question of, why are people living in waterways to begin with? There are a variety of interconnected stressors that both drive homelessness and further stem from people living in waterways. And just some of these include systemic inequity, a lack of affordable housing and healthcare, unlivable wages, lack of shelter resources. All of these compound and continue to keep vulnerable communities marginalized. And in conjunction with safety concerns or restrictive rules at shelters, this often drives people experiencing homelessness to camp somewhere. That font is a little bit small, but so we specifically, why in waterways? Well, waterways may be very desirable places to live. We heard this from some of our panelists. These spaces offer safety and basic needs like water and shade. They offer privacy, and they offer freedom from constant interaction with law enforcement. And the speaker or the panelists pointed out, quite frankly, many people want to live near the water, which is why we have a lot of flood-prone homes and businesses, right? Waterways are desirable places to live. So there's nothing that makes someone unusual for wanting to live near the water. However, these areas are particularly vulnerable to flood risk, endangering people and communities that are camping along the waterway. We heard in our Bay Area workshop that unhoused individuals are often facing compounding stresses for basic survival, and they don't have much capacity to think about or prepare for flooding. Unhoused people also face constant risks of criminalization, risks to their safety and well-being, separation from their loved ones, their pets, their belongings, and re-traumatization. But camping in waterways carries risks to the environment. It carries flood risk to infrastructure and risk to communities that rely on that infrastructure. So communities camping adjacent to streams or rivers with no designated place to collect trash, it can lead to environmental degradation as belongings enter or collect in the waterways. Possible environmental risks stemming from this activity include reduction in water quality, a loss of habitat, and occasionally fires. And these can have implications for the fish and critters living in and near water bodies, as well as for local water agencies that are tasked with cleanup, which is often very expensive. Now, if communities are living in flood risk infrastructure, such as levees, this can impact the quote structural integrity of the levee or the infrastructure. And that can cause damage to the infrastructure. It can increase the chance of that infrastructure failing or breaking. We also heard from flood risk managers that their operations and maintenance crews sometimes face safety risks when working on infrastructure if it's being used as housing. We also learned that having teammates trained in social services or mental health could be a hugely valuable resource to keep everyone safe. But in the near term, flood control agencies don't have this type of training. And then finally, if there is damage to flood risk infrastructure or like a levee or a dam, then this increases the risk to communities that are currently protected by the infrastructure, leading to higher life safety risks and property damage. And so it is important to understand the interwoven consequences to unhoused communities, ecosystems, flood control infrastructure, and communities protected by the infrastructure. Now I'll dive in a little more specifically to the two workshops and our key takeaways from them. So our big takeaway from the first workshop, which was the one in Los Angeles, was learning what agencies and organizations across Southern California are doing actively or otherwise to manage some of these risks before, during, and after a flood. So there ended up being a large focus on quote camp cleanups in the dialogue. And you will see that language reflected here. I think some of this was also what encouraged us to shift between the first and second workshop to making sure we better understood and could center the experiences of people. Not that cleanup isn't something that is required and important, but it's certainly not the only thing, and maybe not even a priority, right? Depending on the management initiative. So what we heard about what agencies are working on right now is coordinating evacuation plans and outreach to encampments. They have sometimes multilingual warning cards that liaisons would go distribute. They're also hiring some staff with social work and behavioral health expertise. And many staff are also consistently or continuously maintaining and repairing levees as needed. What else is needed? We had a discussion on this as well. Some of these partners asked a lot for information and clarity on everyone, the Corps of Engineers included, capabilities and authorities, right? Like what they are authorized to do by law related to this whole cycle. We also heard about the need for more ways to coordinate both before the storm to clean things up quickly. And it currently, much of it requires permitting. We also heard about the need for multi-jurisdictional coordination, possibly using ourselves as a convener for that multi-jurisdictional coordination, because right now no one entity holds that responsibility. And then finally, we heard about the universal need for more staff and more shelter space and resources during a flood. In the Bay Area workshop, as Emily mentioned, we had 3 panels, and the first discussed experiences that are driving homelessness nationally, and they these included job loss, wage stagnation, financial losses due to medical conditions, domestic violence, unaffordable rent, mental health crises, substance abuse, and evictions. This was where we also learned more about sort of the landscape in the Bay Area, about who was experiencing homelessness. We learned that flood-prone areas may be attractive for unhoused people for a few reasons, in part because people don't always prefer shelters. Most communities also lack both long and short-term shelter spaces, beds, and other resources. And even if there were more or enough shelter beds, we learned from panelists that not all individuals want to stay in shelters for a multitude of reasons. These include distrust of the shelter systems, stringent rules, fear of not meeting the criteria required to stay in a shelter, the lead time, fear of sexual assault, curfew, or other rules that prevent partners and pets from staying together. As we mentioned, we also heard we mentioned in the picture that I showed you that areas along waterways, on the other hand, provide access to shade, water, nice scenery, and provide people with longer term private individualized spaces to live. We learned that flood impacts are traumatic, and often there is very limited or no individual capacity for people experiencing homelessness to also prepare for floods. And then finally, we heard loud and clear that homelessness is an experience, not an identity. And that we were requested by the panelists to please use language, adjust our language to reflect this. They also very specifically told us that when you see unhoused people, smile at them, say hi to them, make eye contact, and simply acknowledge them, that can make a huge difference in people's individual experiences. The next panel was where we heard from environmental and flood risk managers on sort of the things that keep them up at night and the challenge that they face in managing flood risk infrastructure with the presence of unhoused people. And they are responsible for safely operating and maintaining their facilities. So we heard from them that some unsheltered communities live along this infrastructure and they dig dwellings directly, sometimes into the levee systems, which can create instability in that flood control system. And these conditions then interfere with the structural integrity, and it increased risk to the community protected by the levee. And we also heard that encampments in the infrastructure, not only does it pose risk to the people living there and to the infrastructure, but there was a concern about risk to the levee and infrastructure operators and the levee and infrastructure inspectors. So dam and levee operators, they are required to go out to those infrastructure many times, and especially in advance of and during a flood, and they need to be able to inspect the levees and the facilities. And some feel uncomfortable, or it's physically impossible for them to inspect the levee with housing there. And they also don't feel like they have the expertise needed in housing or social services or mental health training to do that work and do those inspections the way that they need to be. And so without that type of training, we heard from them that, this can further compound trauma and distrust that exists between unhoused communities and government agencies. And we also heard directly from these agencies that there are because of the way that many flood and water agencies are funded in California, related to a specific law of how you create an agency, there are very strict limits on how they can use their funding, and it currently can't be used to provide staff with this type of training. Whoops, sorry about that. I jumped ahead. Just want to make sure. Also, the other issues that were strongly concerning to them is about water quality and environmental degradation that comes from the household items and sometimes human waste. And then we also learned that encampments are often opportunistic sites for dumping. So there is a lot of stigma around what looks like waste or garbage near encampments. And some of that is because outside people who do not live in this unhoused community use it as an opportunity to dump because they believe it will sort of blend in. Another perception about the sort of lack of tidiness around unhoused communities, sometimes the things outside of their tents are their household items. So items that you and I might have in our apartments. If your apartment is a tent, then it might just be outside your tent. So it might be your daily living items, but to the passerby, maybe it looks like it's garbage. So that's sort of another challenge that we learned about, the stigmatizing of quote, trash and encampments. We heard that cleanup activities are not well funded, and that some cities or water districts are looking to find funding to help move people out of high risk areas. Okay, so the third panel, we heard from HUD, so Housing and Urban Development. We heard from the California Office of Emergency Services, their Office of Access and Functional Needs, and we heard from a unhoused encampment liaison for the Corps of Engineers on their experiences and what considerations we might think about if we were to try to have a care-driven approach to flood risk management. What could that look like? And so they focused a lot on inclusivity of unsheltered communities in the planning, in the decision-making, and the importance of establishing trust-based relationships. Our panelists encourage the use of care-driven approaches to safeguard lives and belongings while reducing the potential for compounded trauma. Part of implementing care-driven approaches is focusing on the individual rather than focusing on an agency's agenda or their standard operations and the daily things that the agencies need to get done. What we heard from panelists is focus on the individuals and what they need rather than just on what the agencies are used to doing. Next, we also heard, this is probably not a surprise to this group, that disasters disproportionately affect people with disabilities and people with access and functional needs. And at least in California, the state considers unhoused individuals in the same group as those with access and functional needs. For example, flood warnings might not fully account for language or mobility needs of people in unhoused communities. And many unhoused people do not have phones, so text alerts might not be effective. And the transient nature of some communities could further complicate emergency communications and response. Next, we heard that trust-based relationships with unhoused communities, as I'm sure this whole group knows, trust-based relationships with all communities are essential. And they advised us to work with groups and agencies who have pre-established relationships or are already doing that work on the ground. So in the case of the workshop that we had participants from the downtown streets team. You know, you probably know in your area the groups that are working with unhoused folks. We also heard from our liaison at the core that if someone in an unhoused, whoops, I'm jumping the gun here. We need collaborative, community-oriented solutions that bring individuals with lived experience to the table. And so it was, you know, from this that we said we need to get them there. As we were working on this workshop, we were not in a capacity to pay someone for their time. And so we did not want to be extractive in that way. And we did not feel that, myself included, that we had the expertise needed to ask an unhoused person to speak to our group of people and make sure we could keep them safe and not cause harm or trauma. So what we did instead was we connected with the downtown streets team and we worked with the City of San Jose's unhoused outreach coordinator, and someone who had done their research, their PhD research, living with unhoused communities in the American River flood channels, as sort of a proxy. But we still, you know, with that, we still heard that when we get to projects and working on this, we need people with actual lived experience. And I would say one serendipitous outcome was it turned out that on our infrastructure panel, that was the second panel, we had infrastructure and flood control managers. One of them explained during his session or during his talk that he previously experienced homelessness, which we didn't know before that talk. But so that was a benefit, an extra benefit to having his experience there. Finally, what we heard from our liaison that the Corps has in the LA district was that if an agency or an organization is bringing, quote, a solution to a community and they're not accepting that solution or using that solution, then we're probably not offering the right solution. So the suggestion was, rather than say, well, why aren't they taking my solution, to revisit, are we offering the right solution? So these are the findings from those. And now Emily is going to sort of talk about next steps and recommendations and actions for change.
Thanks, Jessica. So yeah, I wanted to take a moment to talk about the products of the project and, you know, what we're doing from here on out. So one of the products was to prepare a summary report with all the findings, and that included also creating that graphic that Jessica went through. That's a great visualization for communication, like communicating these risks and the contributors to this problem. And it's a great way to, you know, get the message across to different audiences. We use it for things like this. We use it when we, you know, are starting a new project. And it's, yeah, really helpful and very straightforward to see that sort of mapped out. And then we also prepared an internal flood risk management and homeless encampment protocol, which includes a phone tree. And that was really interesting to work on because it started off as this huge, like messy, really rough, like draft in an Excel sheet of like people that we could possibly call on when there is, you know, a need for evacuation. And I remember calling people that I didn't even know. And I was working in Michigan. So I'm calling these people from California. Hey, what is your role? How can you help in this time of need? And, it's always trying to make those connections before we actually need them. So the making a friend during a sunny day type thing. And yeah, so creating that phone tree started off really rough like that. But then we started talking to more people and started making those connections and getting the right person on our list, so that our homeless encampment liaison can call them during that time of need. Yeah, and so the protocol itself, prescribes actions that the liaison and the dam operators can do before, during, and after a flood. Again, calling people during sunny times, making that friend during sunny times, not just when you need them. They were also, well, at least here in Michigan, I have been trying to get sort of like the same kind of protocol here for our state, and making those connections. So it's not really starting from scratch, but also kind of starting from scratch. So yeah, making those connections. I've talked to the Michigan State Police, since they are our agency partner. And it's, very stigmatized here in Michigan, as well. And it's sometimes hard to have those conversations, but we have this sort of precedent now, and this case study, if you will, to help with projects in the future. And Jessica will talk more about some other things going on. And then what else? We've connected with unlikely agencies to brainstorm and elevate this discussion. Some colleagues have suggested, what if floodplain managers or infrastructure operators, could build this type of protocol and best practices into like an operations and maintenance manual. So it could be used, and there's sort of like a standard practice where everybody can look to. And yeah, so just things like that. Trying to get creative, trying to have discussions. To think of some ways that maybe we've never done before, and not one agency can solve this very complex interconnected problem, but at least moving the needle and doing our part as best as we can, is something that we learned, and sort of take for next steps and moving forward with this. Yeah, so our protocol here is, I could read it off, but basically, we have different actions to take all the time. So that's our ongoing stuff, performing regular outreach with known encampments, working with law enforcement agencies to remove high danger encampments within flood risk management projects, and performing regular maintenance on channels and dams. Immediately before a flood or evacuation, some things that we can do is create a notification within the Army Corps, from Reservoir Regulation Center, O&M team activation, activate dams and channel watch, call local law enforcement agencies with jurisdictions, with encampments that may be in danger. And then during, we said Reservoir Operations Center activates, monitor water levels, specific dams are activated, and channel watch may be activated as well. And then after is to assess damage. I remember that was like one of the things that the homeless encampment liaison thought was like one of the most important things, at least from our perspective, is to assess the damage, clean up excess trash and debris, and coordinating calls with various agencies to see what unsheltered communities were evacuated.
Awesome.
Next slide.
Thanks, Emily.
Yep,
I think this one's me.
Yep.
And maybe one thing I'll throw out, even though we don't have a slide for it, is last March in California, there was Hurricane Hillary. They ended up needing to evacuate because we had to do dam releases. We had to release water on one of the Southern California dams. And Trevor, our liaison, called us to tell us that he had used the phone tree and the protocol that Emily and our team had worked on, and they were able to safely evacuate 65 individuals from below our Santa Fe Dam and connect them with long-term resources. And then another thing that happened, I think somewhat still related to this project, was there was like a flyover the American River floodway where they dropped pamphlets to let people know about the incoming flood releases. I don't know about the follow-up of that, but this was just something that our liaison had reported to us and sort of said, thank you for putting this together. We used it. It made for a better outcome than in the past. So that was cool to know. Real briefly, our Nevada Silver Jackets team had a webinar, which you can find on YouTube, and I think I have the link on one of these next slides. So Nevada Silver Jackets has taken an interest. We have an upcoming workshop through our Sacramento district. I think it's next month. We are hopeful to submit a proposal for the fiscal year 2026, where we can actually work with a very specific unhoused community near a project that we are working on to have an emergency protocol with them, for them, and with the agencies and community organizations. There is a proposal just submitted out of cycle. Hopefully it'll be funded in the Las Vegas area. And then we did have a workshop in San Diego, and just a couple additional findings that were new to the San Diego story is I was not on this project, but we got updates from our colleagues who were, and they said that something that came out loud and clear was that homelessness is a policy choice and a failure of a system rather than the failure of the individual. That when we offer emergency housing, it needs to include options for individuals and families and safe places for people who don't want to be in a facility or a shelter. And then we also heard that when we're conducting outreach to connect people with housing or resources, that we need to practice neighborhood-based, trust-based, and persistent outreach strategies. We talked about a care-informed floodplain management approach. And I won't go in detail all these because I want to leave time for questions, but we'll share the slides. So we heard loud and clear to use humanizing and respectful language, both to, about, and with people experiencing homelessness, to think about perceptions and stigma. That with this, all agencies, all organizations really need to be leveraging all of these to improve outcomes for unsheltered communities during floods. We can and now have the ability to integrate unsheltered and functional needs into emergency action plans. We heard and have been encouraged, and we did through these workshops, to bring HUD and continuum of care providers to the table, even though they haven't typically been part of sort of the flood risk manager's Rolodex, if you will. And then encouraging to build trust and coordinate with organizations that already have the relationships and regularly work with unhoused communities, to bring unsheltered communities to the table in planning, design, and construction, and to connect with the Interagency Council on Homelessness, because they now I don't want to say now, not as a result of our work, but in parallel, are working on disaster preparedness, and I think are ready to release a guide working with unhoused people and disaster preparedness. Just some additional resources for yourself. HUD has a toolkit. NAFSMA is engaged in this. If you go to their website, they are engaged on behalf of the Flood and Stormwater Agency. You can find these some slides from another workshop, and then I'll just say that what we're hearing is people, individuals, staff, they are eager for this information. They're eager for these discussions. A lot of people care about this, have been inspired about it. They've asked us for more workshops. We believe strongly that this work can inform more of our work at the Corps of Engineers and all types of hazard mitigation. And also, I would just advise to all of you that you just need to be prepared for, so you can stay present in the discussion. Be prepared for when you get that reluctance or pushback or discomfort that comes from people when they're involved in this discussion. And often the default reply is, it's not my responsibility. But I think that if we are prepared for this, then we can keep people engaged in how it is. Can't have this discussion without referencing grants past, and I don't have any analysis on this except to say that the severity and challenges associated with homelessness and criminalizing homelessness, or putting people making people incarcerated in homelessness, is all the more reason that we need all the people at the table to begin solving root causes. But also something that if we are out there doing outreach on the ground, working with people, need to keep in mind that these are the burdens that individuals are carrying, and maybe let that turn into compassion, let that turn into trauma-informed approaches. And I had some parting words, but I don't think that I'm going to go deep into them because I want to leave at least a few minutes for questions. And I can also stay on. And I don't know about Emily, but can stay on for questions. And so we just have a thank you here with our contact information. And I would encourage you to just think a little bit about today, about something you learned that you can put into action, maybe something that you learned that could make you feel stuck, but then think about who in your community helps you feel unstuck. And we're happy to be that person. So with that, I'll stop talking and stop sharing, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Emily and Jessica. That was such a well laid out and just powerful presentation on this work that you're doing. So thank you for doing this work and for taking the time to share it with us. I feel like I wish we had like 3 hours to devote to more conversations like this. So hopefully this is one of many, many conversations we can revisit. We probably have time for maybe one question, and then I'll go ahead and do our outro, and then if maybe we'll hold it open for another 5 minutes if people do want to stay on for just a little bit. We can do that since you guys offered. So one of the questions that came up was from Carl, who was asking, there's definitely flooding along rivers, but there's also other types of hazards like wildfires. So are you aware of any people who are thinking about how to address multi-hazard risks for unsheltered people living in floodplains or other areas like that?
So my answer is no, but I also don't work in our Los Angeles district, so I'm the wrong person to answer that question. But Carl, thank you for the question, and it's a really, really good point. I think one of the reasons the Army Corps takes a really focused flood risk management is because of our authority. So we are trying to expand and encourage more discussions. If you are interested in me actually following up and answering that question for you, then maybe you could email me with the question, and then I can talk to my counterpart in the Los Angeles district. They do a lot more work down there, and they would be able to answer that question if someone is, if that works for you. So I think I think maybe when Carson, do you send out the slides or anything, or I can?
Well, yeah, we will post
I
the
can
slides
also put
online.
okay.
Yeah, but if you
Okay.
want to put your contact information in the chat, that would be great. All right, we can do one more question here. So this is from June, who just said it was a great presentation. They live in the LA, and there's a PBS documentary about people experiencing homelessness living along the Los Angeles River. Is there any way of identifying whether the LA river system is connected in any way with the Army Corps?
Let me say this one more time. Is there any way of identifying whether the LA river system is connected with the Army Corps?
So I guess kind of like whose responsibilities are these different water systems? Yeah.
Yeah, so depending on, which segment you're curious about, I'm sure that so the Army Corps definitely is involved with the LA River. There's been a lot of efforts a long time, but I don't know which segments of it. So that's probably like you yourself could, the way that you could find that out would be to like take a look and type in Army Corps LA River study, and you would probably find their feasibility study. And then if you click on that, you'd be able to see a map of where specifically the Army Corps is involved. If you do not want to take that approach, you could email me. I just put my email in the chat for the other person. You could email me, and I could put you in touch with my colleague who works on LA River stuff, and they could get back to you.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share our closing, but we will go ahead and stay on for a few minutes after this. I just want to, again, thank our presenters, Jessica and Emily, and the many other people who contributed to this effort that they spoke on today. I also want to thank FEMA and the National Science Foundation for making this webinar series possible. We are so grateful for you all who joined us today. And I want to encourage you to contact us at hazardcenter@colorado.edu if you do plan on requesting continuing education credits that were offered through IAEM and ASFPM for today's. So please email us and specify which kind of credit you want. Additionally, we hope that you will save the date for our next Making Mitigation Work webinar. It will be Tuesday, November 12th from 11 to noon Mountain Time. And our next topic is going to be with representatives from the Federal Emergency Management Agency talking about updates to their grant program guidance and implications for that for local communities. So we hope you will subscribe to updates through the Natural Hazard Center website to receive notifications about our upcoming webinars and other free resources, and signing up for workshop announcements when they start coming out. So now, on behalf of the entire team at the Natural Hazard Center, we want to again thank our panelists for this wonderful presentation today, as well as all the participants who joined. We look forward to seeing you in November. And for those of you who need to sign off, feel free to sign off. Otherwise, we'll stay on for another 5 minutes and then we'll close it out. Thank you so much. Awesome. All right, so for those of you who are still here, I had a couple other questions that were here. I think you already sort of answered one of the questions that was just talking about. I'm wondering if you got any input from ecologists and environmental scientists in some of your panels.
So one of the panelists was he worked for Public Works and is responsible for the environmental management and water quality certifications and permits and that sort of stuff. And I know he has a background, but we didn't specifically seek out folks with environmental science backgrounds, if that helps.
Let's see, what was some of the other ones here? Somebody asked about what other kinds of public health risks that you were looking at. So they mentioned E. coli or other waterborne diseases.
Yeah, that came out, and that came out in the context of the communities living downstream of unhoused communities and the potential for water quality degradation affecting water quality out downstream and the public health impacts of that. But we didn't go any more deeply into that. It was sort of like, okay, these issues came up and we're documenting them, but we haven't looked in detail.
Okay.
I was going to say something that did come up, even as we initiated the second panel, when we were seeking out panelists, was, and some of the panelists from the flood control perspective were a little nervous to participate. And part of that is because the amount of political pressure that they face in what is perceived as what people think is an unsolvable issue. And what I mean by that is they said, yes, of course, I care about the safety of these individuals, but if I start talking about how to keep these individuals safe, I'm getting pushback from the city of blank that makes it look like we accept that encampments are here. And so he was like, that might be how I show up in the panel. And I just want you to know that. And so we asked questions that would be able to help us get at answers in ways that didn't put them on the spot. But I guess I just want to say, if you are a flood risk manager, like that is a likely very real challenge that you are facing in saying you care about the well-being of unhoused individuals or communities as a whole.
Yeah, that's such a great point. One more question that I think we probably have time for this last one, and then we'll probably wrap it up. So you mentioned that along levees, sometimes there's degradation of the levee. So I think this question is related to that. So how did you have some conversations about how do you talk to communities about maybe some of the things that are making the levees less safe, that they might, still be able to pick up that space, but maybe try to avoid some of those kinds of activities that might be degrading the levee? Did you guys talk about that at all?
Emily, do you want to respond? And if not, I can also jump in. The answer is no, but we might have thoughts on this. Yeah, that could be a great idea. So you're to clarify, you're suggesting like in part of the conversations with and relationship building with unhoused communities in these dangerous areas, is there a way to integrate like them understanding that doing this could pose a safety risk to others? And that sounds like a great opportunity for communication. And it's kind of the like once you have trust, it's like the opportunities are endless for what we can, not endless, but like for the type of conversations that you can have. And yeah, there have been, I think, discussions around like stewardship and paying unhoused communities to like do the cleanup. And I think Valley Water might be exploring some of that to focus on cleaning areas and to engage in stewarding levees by not digging into them could also be, seems like worth exploring.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for staying on a little bit after. And I know there are more questions, but unfortunately we got to close this down. So,
Yeah.
but you know, Jessica and Emily left their emails. So for folks who are still on, feel free to reach out to them if you have additional questions and want to talk about it. Jessica and Emily, I always like to give you opportunity to just have like, what is your final one thought you want to leave the remaining 30 folks who have stayed on after? What do you want them to take away?
Do you want me to go first? Okay. I would say that keep doing what you're doing and fighting for what you believe in. We're not supposed to be like an advocacy, agency. We're not supposed to advocate for anything, but just being like a good person and doing good work and asking good questions and being curious and engaging with people the way that you want to be engaged with, I think is extremely important in doing this type of work. And I think anybody can do it no matter what you do in work.
That's awesome. I was gonna similarly say that if you are even on the fence of getting involved versus thinking that this is just too hard or there's too much pushback, I would say like we are seeing successes and changes and like a groundswell of people who are tired of the status quo. And so I would say like the train is moving, get on it. Like there's definitely opportunities here, and a lot of it comes from the ground up, whether it's the community organizations themselves or individuals within agencies who really want to see stuff changing. It's a really great time to be involved and push. And if you ever want to like bounce ideas or brainstorm, you've got a friend in us. Yeah.
I love that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you for your extra time today. And I'm sure we'll be in touch. Thank you. And thanks everyone.
Great. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.